Okay. I would like to tell you a little bit more about Green America's Climate Victory Gardens campaign, which has reached nearly 25,000 gardens worldwide. Oh, come on, slide. There we go. As you heard in the video, it was inspired by the victory gardens of the First and Second World Wars, where nearly half of the food grown in the US came from backyard victory gardens as part of the war effort. This was seen as patriotic, and it is so different from the food system we have in place today. Green America launched this campaign in 2018 because of the wide range of benefits that come from gardening. Everything from supporting mental and physical health to beautifying and creating safer communities. Those localized benefits are pretty obvious to anyone who's spent time in a garden, but the potential for really powerful climate impacts are a bit harder to grasp. So Green America saw an opportunity for a lot of education and growth there. Victory gardens were a force for change back then, and we want to make that happen again, this time focused on the climate and inclusive of everyone who wants to have a garden. And with nearly 25,000 gardens, we're seeing that impact already. So why are we focusing on the climate? Statistics show that 70% of Americans are worried about the climate, and half of Americans feel helpless in the face of the climate crisis. Those stats tell us that people feel overwhelmed by the issue, that the climate crisis feels too enormous to tackle, and that folks feel disempowered. Maybe they're sick of being told that the solution is to use more efficient light bulbs or to look to the government for leadership on this issue. So we're highlighting gardening as something that is already a people and planet positive activity, as well as an action that can have a meaningful impact on the climate. Of course, gardening isn't a silver bullet, but our gardens can move the dial a bit on this issue, and they have lots of other benefits as well. We've already heard over the years how gardening has enabled folks to take action and helped ease their climate anxiety. Gardening is all positive and uplifting, but I do include this slide on climate research to show how important climate solutions are, why we need them, and how they're interconnected with the challenges and solutions in agriculture. Some reports have said we have less than 10 years to meaningfully address the climate crisis. It's also said that we may only have around 50 years of agricultural topsoil left to grow food. At the same time, our food systems are emitting around 1/3 of the world's greenhouse gases. Recent research shows that agriculture and land use are as polluting as power plants, which means there's a great potential for change in this area. And an important point I want to highlight about greenhouse gases and our climate is that we know we need to slow the pollution we're emitting into the air, but there's already too much of those greenhouse gases up there. So we need a way to pull carbon out of the air back into the ground if we're going to stop and reverse the climate crisis. The positive takeaway is that research also shows that agriculture is a great way to do both. Slow emissions that are already happening in the sector and draw carbon dioxide out of the air. And we can do both of those in our gardens as well. So this intersection of food and climate is an important place to be, and it's a place where we and you, our audience, can exercise our decision-making power every time we eat or work in the garden. So how does climate victory gardening work? In our gardens, we want to prioritize maximizing soil protection because this is where we can capture carbon, pulling it out of the air and storing it underground. And when I say carbon, I'm talking about the carbon that's in carbon dioxide, that powerful greenhouse gas and a big cause of the climate crisis. In a moment, I'll share 10 principles that help us maximize soil protection. At Green America, we make a distinction between dirt and soil. Dirt is dead. Soil is rich and alive. You can see it in this photo here. You can almost smell the soil here. At least I can. So a single handful of healthy soil has more microorganisms than there are people on the planet. 1/4 of the Earth's biodiversity is in the soil, and Rafaela will tell you more about this later on. Today, in industrial agriculture, soil is actually a source of carbon emissions because of how badly it's treated and all the products used on it that kill soil life and release carbon into the air. But under good management on the farm and in our gardens, soil and these microorganisms can hold huge amounts of carbon. We just have to grow food the right way for it to be a climate solution. Here are the 10 principles that we encourage gardeners to adopt. They're all ways to build healthy soils and lessen impacts on the climate and ensure a bountiful harvest. Brooke, could you please launch the second poll? It has 2 questions in it. Brooke is going to launch a poll that asks, which of these practices do you already use and are familiar with, and which ones would you like to learn more about? And you should be able to select multiple answers for each one. All right, I'm seeing a lot of folks are growing food they love to eat. That's wonderful. Oh, a lot of composters already. That's great. Mhm. Have a few more folks answering. About half of you planted perennials. That's also great. And what I'm seeing for the second question, which ones would you have the most questions about? Which ones do you want to learn more about? I'm seeing a lot of folks want to learn more about covering their soils, encouraging biodiversity, using people power. I bet some of you use a lot of people power already, and rotating crops. So these are all things we can explore more in depth. All right. In this moment, I won't go too into depth on these because we have lots of great resources on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. And Rafaela will talk more about them later on in the presentation. But I'll give 2 quick examples right now. Let's look at number 5, plant perennials. Perennials are plants that grow for years, like berry bushes, which means you disturb the soil less because you don't have to replant each year. They better support and protect life in the soil and also capture carbon at deeper levels. What are some of your favorite perennials? Go ahead and type in the chat what some of your favorite perennials are. One of my favorite flowering perennials are sweet williams. And then also let's quickly look at number 8, use people power. It's all about choosing good old-fashioned hard work over mechanization. For example, running a gasoline-powered leaf blower for just an hour is equivalent to driving a new Toyota Camry 1,100 miles. So this shows how little efforts and more informed, mindful decisions, like raking instead of using a leaf blower, can make a big difference for the climate. We don't expect all gardeners to be able to do all of these things, but chances are each of you is already doing some of them, and we saw that in the poll. The goal is to have gardeners do what they can now and build from there. Oh, change slide, there you go. I've talked a lot about growing soils and growing food, and I want to touch on the human element again because I think it's important to mention how we can grow community too. The victory gardening movement of the 1940s was successful because it was collective action and communities coming together. Similarly today, community resilience is really important. I think this became especially apparent during the pandemic. Food is a great way to connect with and support others. Around 1 in 8 people in the US are food insecure. We can play a role in this issue and amplified the impact of the CBG campaign and of gardening by sharing harvests and creating and supporting spaces for community gardens, school gardens, and gardens that are publicly accessible, especially in underserved areas. If you are a beginner or well-seasoned gardener, please join our community by telling your gardening friends about us and adding your garden to our map, for which we'll put a link in the chat. Now, today we welcome the TransPlanter Rafaela Crevoshay, an expert in compost, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable soil management. She will give us some in-depth insight on soil health and management, and she will also be joining us for several more webinars throughout this season, so be on the lookout for those. Please welcome Rafaela.
Earlier about CVG and the goals, and one kind of an undisclosed feature of global crises is that we're running out of soil. The soil is being depleted at a very rapid rate. And as Emma mentioned, the UN has already predicted that in a few decades, we may be out of soil. So the urgency to garden at home is more urgent than we may have imagined, and we need to take it very seriously. It is on the same level as climate change. The thing is, climate change is something that we all see. We see storms, we see the climate warming, we see all kinds of changes in our environment, but we don't see the soil depleting. That happens very, very, very slowly and kind of invisibly. So it's not the same kind of visible crisis that we have with climate change, but it's equally serious. Next slide, please. Emma? Hello?
I changed the slide on my end, so I don't know what you're looking
Okay, yeah, I got it. Oh, yeah, I got it. Okay, so there it is. So we're talking about the transformational gardening. So what gets transformed? First of all, there's a few things. Actually, there are more things than I've listed here, but first and foremost, the soil. We have control in our garden in a way that no farmer has control, because we've got such a such a small space, and it's so intensely managed. We can do things that farmers can't do. So we can optimize the biological factors in the soil. That's very big. Every farmer wishes they could do that. They can influence it. They can't do what we can do. Then there's the environment. The transformational garden inevitably creates a mini ecosystem, and you'll see it if you start with just an empty raised bed, and you start to build your garden within, certainly by the second season and definitely by the third season, you're going to see a proliferation of life around it, and you're going to realize you've created a mini ecosystem, and it's a whole new environment for your backyard. And then there's you get transformed in this because of the way it empowers you. It will enable you to do things in your garden that you had never really thought of or never imagined. You have such a profound influence. I don't want to call it control, because you're really partnering with the biology of the soil to make this all happen. Now, gardeners have options, as I just said, about that are not available to farmers. Now, most agricultural soils have about 2 to 3% organic matter. The exceptional ones have maybe 10%. That would be really exceptional. That's what they're dealing with in farmland, whether it's pretty much regardless of the crops. That's the range. But in transformational soils, soils that we can manage in our own backyards, we can have up to 100% of soil organic matter. That's mind blowing. You don't have to use 100%. I do, but you could use 50%, even 30 or 40%. It makes a huge difference. Why? It's about the soil biology, because that soil organic matter is the stuff of life, the staff of life, I would say, for the microbes in the soil. Now, secondly, there's biodiversity, which you can do better in a garden than you can on a farm. Farmers do it. They will plant multiple crops. They'll plant things between their rows, and the best farmers will do a good job of it. But you could do a spectacular job of it, because first of all, you don't have to follow the conventional format of planting rows, crops in rows. You can do it any way you want. You can be artistic. You can be chaotic. It doesn't matter. As long as you have an abundance of biodiversity, it's going to work, and it's going to work better than it works for farmers. And then cycling through of diverse cultivars, and I'll talk about this at the end when we talk about the CVG tenets of garden management. But cycling through it's another way to describe crop rotation, and it may be actually crop rotation that you're practicing, but if you've got a chaotic garden like I do, you will just kind of replace your spent crops with a different one, something different, and that'll contribute to biodiversity. Now, soil organic matter, or SOM, is the key to all this stuff, and that's why I promote as much organic matter as you can possibly add.
Hey, Rafaela, I need to interrupt you. You haven't told me to change slides, but I think you've changed slides.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I'm able to change it myself.
I know, but you're not changing on the screen, so I need you to look at the Zoom screen and tell me when to change slides.
Okay, yeah, we'll do.
Which slide are you on?
Okay, I'm on soil organic matter. Sorry about that. I apologize.
Okay, I'm there.
Are we there? Yeah. Oh, I see where it's popping up. Okay. So soil organic matter, it's really what makes this this song happen. It's basically any material that's originally produced by living organisms, plants or animals. So it can be leaves, it can be grass clippings, it can technically be manure of any kind, and it can be animal residues. It could be dead fish or animal remains. Though I'm certainly not encouraging you to use those in your garden, and you don't need to. But that's what soil organic matter is all about, and it's returned to the soil, and through the process of decomposition, it becomes soil. And this is an essential theme of our endeavor. Go ahead, Emma. Sorry, we can switch now. Okay. Now, industrial chemicals. This is a no-no. Don't use industrial chemicals. Just don't. Don't do it. You don't need them. This is something that has been foisted upon us in the modern age in the same way that gas-driven automobiles have been. Now, we haven't managed to escape from our dependence on gas-driven cars, but we can certainly leave industrial chemicals behind. We don't need them in our garden. We have a way to provide abundant fertility by using high quality manure-based compost. Now, this is a picture of a typical compost yard where they do this. They're using 30 to 80% manure, and the rest is hay or straw or something like that. It takes about 3 weeks. it gets to a high temperature of between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and it produces heat-loving bacteria that break down make nutrients available to your soil like nothing else. You can't do this at home, unfortunately. You really can't. But these kinds of facilities are present nearby to almost every major urban area in the country. So if you can't find one, get a hold of me and I'll help you find one. There are very few places that don't have them anymore. This is becoming a feature of of modern life, and I mean, this stuff it's inexpensive. You can get a pickup load or a few barrels worth of it, bring it home and fill your beds with it. It's better than any compost you can make at home. And I'm not discouraging homemade compost, but this is the tops. Next slide, please. So one of the things that soil organic matter is doing, it's doing things for you. Is the aggregation of the soil, and this photo kind of shows it. The shot on the right, well, actually it's one shot, but the right shows kind of micro aggregation where soil particles have come together and they've aggregated, and that's it looks it doesn't look it, but it's very stable stuff, and it enables the soil to resist floods because it allows maximum penetration and infiltration of rainwater. So in a flood situation, a field with well aggregated soil will do fine. But the poorly structured soil on the left will flood. And the inverse is true for droughts. The well aggregated soil tends to hold more moisture, and it allows your crops to be more resilient and survive droughts. And then, of course, there's more soil aeration. And, you know, it's not something that's talked about a lot, but plant roots need air too. They need oxygen. So there's got to be a pathway for that to enter the soil. And of course, microbial proliferation is very much favored by good soil aggregation. And that all leads to better disease resistance, and it optimizes access to soil nutrition. I can hardly say enough good things about soil aggregation. Next slide, please. So cover crops is something that we strongly urge, and it's in the tenets of that I described earlier about CVG's program. It's a way to keep the soil covered at all times. But I would, and it's useful for that, but what I recommend is using it deliberately. And let's say you have 3 beds at home, or 3 sections if you're not using raised beds. Dedicate one section every year for at least a few months just to cover crops. And if you can plant a diversity of cover crops, that's even better. Look at these root systems. Look what they're doing into your soil. They're deep. They're diving deep. They have different configurations, different methods of behavior and penetration. They're all doing something special for your soil. And it's worth dedicating a part of a season or a whole season to cover crops. It's just going to improve your soil. It'll add massive amounts of soil organic matter. It'll go deep into the soil. And another important use of them is that if you have a disease situation, and this is something I wanted to mention because we had a webinar last week. Somebody asked a question about whether you need special treatments when you have a serious disease outbreak. And I didn't answer that the way it probably should have been. The answer is yes, if you do have a soil-borne disease or soil-borne pest, a pest that's always breeding under there, use the cover crops for a season. It'll break up their cycle and you'll have them no more. Next slide, please. And then there's vermicompost. I love vermicompost. There's really nothing better. I would use 100% vermicompost instead of 100% of that high quality thermophilic um, compost that I mentioned earlier. But it's pretty expensive. But you can make it yourself. There's limits to how much you can make, but you can make it yourself. It's a great use for food scraps, kitchen scraps, and all that thing. You can make it at home. The only problem with that can be odor. If you're in a warm climate like California or Texas or Florida, you can do it outside year round. If you're in a colder climate, you probably want to avoid using kitchen scraps unless you've got a place where the smell is not going to be an issue. In which case, you can just go down to Starbucks. They will give you for free their spent coffee grounds and bring them home and feed those to your worms. It won't smell and it makes good vermicompost. Vermicompost, the thing about vermicompost is it's got about, oh, I don't know what the figure is. Maybe it's thousands times more biology than the best conventional compost. It's just amazing in that sense. And it has an abundance of humic acids, which is kind of the holy grail of plant nutrients. It does so many things. It works kind of like a hormone. It provides unique nutrition, and super healthy plants. Next slide, please. And then here's the big no-no. Just say no. Just say no. Industrial fertilizers and synthetic pesticides have no place in your garden. Yeah, they work. They work to a certain extent, but they also do a lot of damage. The synthetic pesticides will kill the pest that you want to kill, but they'll kill everything else too. So they really don't discriminate. The fertilizers kind of upset the nutritional balance in the soil. On the farms, they've led to huge, large-scale erosion and the deposition of first-class Midwest topsoil into the Gulf of Mexico. It's a tragedy. So we'll say no to those, but we can say yes to some of these, what I call a la carte soil amendments. Things like blood meal, kelp is great, fish emulsion, bone meal. There's many of these things. You can find them easily. You can use any of them, all of them, or none of them. You'll be all right if you just stick with the thermophilic compost and some vermicompost. So I encourage a splash or two weekly with fish emulsion too. It gives the soil a nice little boost. Next slide, please. I recommend raised beds. You don't have to use them. You don't have to, but they've become very popular and very much standard. There's a lot of benefits to them. One thing I like is they have no bottom, so they integrate the soil that you're creating with the original soil of the bed, and that's over time. It's going to improve that soil. It's going to allow your plant roots to go even deeper and flourish even more. Next slide. Okay, so concerning pest management and disease management, our point of departure is balance. If we're doing everything right, if we're feeding the microbes in the soil and establishing robust populations of microbes in the soil, we're going to achieve a certain kind of balance. Now, with regard to pest eradication, it's been kind of it was originally, and by when that I'm referring to is going back to post World War II, 1950s and 1960s. There was an ethic that was popular among farmers and in agriculture generally and internationally that we can eradicate all the pests. We can just wipe them out, and with things like DDT and things that are now illegal. But we found out that in the end of the story, we never could really eradicate them. There was always some of them that survived, and they'd be stronger than ever. So it's just not a viable strategy. Let's accept that from the beginning that we are trying to create balance, and that balance is going to result in some minor, probably minor populations of unwanted pests, but we can live with it. We ought to be able to live with it and handle it. And we can live with it and handle it by using, when necessary, OMRI approved. OMRI is the national organization approving organic inputs. And they approve pesticides and fungicides and all of these things that can be used judiciously and on a limited basis to alleviate the impact of disease in your garden. And we can also do some long-term things to encourage beneficial insects like ladybugs, praying mantises, bees, dragonflies, lacewings. There's a lot of beneficial bugs, and that's another good reason not to spray the toxic pesticide. Excuse me. But we can encourage them. You can buy some of these things if you don't have them. Get them started in your garden. They'll find food, and the food that they're finding is stuff that you don't want anyway. So it'll all work out in the long run. And then be aggressive with biodiversity, because to the extent that you have a very diverse garden, you will diminish the influence of predatory insects and other disease factors like unwanted fungus and that sort of thing. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, use cover crops to interrupt disease pest cycles. And I recommend them even if you don't have a major problem. If you just use them regularly every third year, every fourth year, something like that, you'll refresh the biology of your soil and give it a healthy new start. Next slide, please.
Rafaela, I have a question first before we move on. When you say be aggressive with biodiversity, do you mean planting all sorts of different plants, and then in doing so, you're attracting all sorts of different insects and birds and whatnot?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I know it's counterintuitive, but it works. It really has a tremendous effect. And some people will need to have, they'll have a kind of an affection for a well-organized, nice-looking garden. You can still do it in that, or if you're the person who doesn't mind chaos, that's really easy to do it in that situation. But it's doable in any situation. And a good way to start is once you've planted your vegetables, and there should be an array of different cultivars, different species of vegetables. So you'll have beans and cabbage and tomatoes and onions. Let's say in your bed, but you can interplant herbs and flowers, and a couple of easy things to plant. Marigolds are a great insect. They don't kill them, but they'll attract them. They'll attract them away from your food plants. And then herbs, a great one is basil, which not only has properties that are inimical to insects, but it's delicious too. I hope that answers your question, Emma.
It did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide. Okay, so we've reached the conclusion, and this is our Climate Victory Gardens protocol for how, this is kind of our 10 commandments. 10 commandments of gardening. Well, one, grow food. That's pretty obvious, but it's not all that obvious to a lot of people. We're in crisis now, and it's a crisis that most of us don't even recognize. You know, the food that you buy in a supermarket ain't all that great. It looks beautiful, but it's not what you think you're getting. That food has been on trucks, sometimes several trucks, traveling sometimes thousands of miles, and there's time involved. And we know that when you pick up a piece of produce from the garden, um, the clock starts ticking immediately. Now, if you pick it from your garden, you're going to eat it within an hour or two. Great, you've maximized the nutrition, but that nutrition will diminish if it's held out for weeks. It's on trucks and moving around from cooler to cooler and finally to the supermarket shelf. It's a good reason in itself to grow your own food. Secondly, is covering soils. Covering soils is something that we talked about. There's various ways to do it. Cover crops are great. But if you don't have a cover crop, if you're just growing food, you need to use mulch. Some kind of mulch. Can be leaves, can be straw, can be dead plants, doesn't matter. Cover the soil. It makes a huge difference. It will preserve the soil's moisture. It protects. There's a lot of bacteria, microbial activity in the upper surface of the soil that is affected seriously by UV rays from the sun. Soil coverage will help that. So that's very important. Compost, I could talk all day long about it, and I'll spare you my additional comments at this point. But compost is, I don't know, maybe you could, if I were to rewrite this, I might make it number one. It's that important. And then ditch the chemicals. No further comment needed about that. Absolutely. Amen. That's all I say, to ditch the chemicals. Encourage biodiversity. Yes, and we just talked about that at some length. Perennials. Yeah, now the thing is, now if you're growing vegetables, you may think, well, how can I grow perennials in here? Well, you can, but another good option is to have planters on the side. You can get, there are available anywhere now, online or wherever you want to buy them, cloth planters. Cloth planters are wonderful innovation in horticulture. They've only become popular in the last 10 or 20 years. But what these things do, unlike your hard clay or plastic or metal planters, they cause the roots don't ball up at the margins. It causes the roots to go back into the soil, and it encourages healthier plants. So what you could do is get some large ones. You can plant your berries in those, blackberries, blueberries, whatever, strawberries, though you can do strawberries in your beds, but remember, it's going to tie up that space for the duration of the crop, which could be a couple of years. So you may want to use planters to ameliorate that situation. You can also plant small fruit trees in these planters. You can get pretty decent sized ones that will support certainly dwarf fruit trees, and dwarfs are available in just about any species, anything you want to grow, and they're available nationally. So there's a good solution for perennials, and native plants. Sure, that's part of the biodiversity picture. Consider animals. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a good and a bad side to that, but There are a lot of animals that you want to encourage, or a certain number of them that you want to encourage. We want lizards in our garden generally because they eat bugs. Um, some of the some of the rodents and things like deer are things we want to exclude. So we want to consider them, but we can consider them in a positive way by maybe planting some things on the outside perimeter of the garden. I don't know. That's something that can be looked into, but it's a possibility. Then crop rotation, I mentioned a little bit earlier with regard to what I call it cycling. Uh, the idea of crop rotation is popular among commercial farmers, but what they're talking about doing is taking a whole field of, let's say, cucumbers, turning it under and putting in a new, a completely different crops. Let's say they're going to move on to cabbage. Okay, that would be crop rotation. It's not going to happen that way in your garden, even if you are doing something that's similar to monoculture. You're going to in the context of biodiversity, it takes on a different meaning. That's really what I mean to say. And using people power, well, yes, it's there've been a lot of very interesting studies that have shown that people who garden are healthier. Yeah, it's true. People who garden, because you're out there, you're breathing fresh air, you're getting exercise of bending and stretching and all that sort of thing. But there has been there's been some interesting work done on the result of people putting their hands into soil. When you put your bare hands into a healthy soil, there's a lot of microbes involved that are going to stay with you. And it seems like it's a pretty positive thing. I have a friend who, during the entire COVID, never got COVID, and he claims it's because he gardens and he sticks his hand in there and he shovels the manure for his horses, and that protected him. And he pointed to me. He said, "Hey, the same's with you, isn't it? I mean, you garden, you do that stuff." Well, yeah, it's not a very convincing sample of the population, but it's something interesting to think of, and I think there is something to it. Getting that soil on your hands and letting it find a new home in your body, which already houses more microbes by weight than our actual body weighs itself. Then observation and improvement. Well, sure, there's no substitute for that because we're inventing this as we go along. This is an adventure. You should look at it as an adventure. It's not something. I mean, these 10 points are very useful guideposts, but they're not. They shouldn't be considered firm instructions. You need to watch and learn and innovate, and that's how we're going to make progress. I noticed that some of you who earlier in the session listed what you're growing. Some of you guys are growing some interesting stuff. You have some stories to tell. I want to learn from you too. So you should look at it as an exploration, and you should not hesitate to share it. Well, that's it pretty
Right.
much for today. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Eager for your questions.
Yes, so we have a couple of questions about from Julia, who is in Botswana. Do you have suggestions for alternatives to mulch when their plant material has been destroyed by extreme heat and drought?
Wow. Well, I never got a question from Botswana before, so thanks for ringing in. I would like to know a little bit more about the destruction of your mulch material and what material are you using, and under what condition are you is it being destroyed? Now, even if it is being destroyed, it's certainly helping to protect the soil surface as long as it's more or less intact. But if you could write me personally, my email is shown on the last page of the. There it is. There's my email. Uh, Let me know specifically what the situation is. What kind of mulch are you using? What temperatures are you experiencing? And if you could include some photos, I would be very interested to try to help you, work with you, and try to figure it out.
Um, Another question is from Paul, who asks, what is your opinion on Milpa garden mixes?
On what gardening?
Milpa, MILPA?
Milpa. That's the Mexican gardening mixes. Emma, is it?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. So that's another one. If you can clarify that, you can send me an email or send another message right now.
Paul, if you're still there, send a message in the chat.
Yeah. Because I'm familiar with the milpas and the Mexican tradition, and but I'm not very clear on what your question is asking.
What's your opinion on them? Are they useful in the garden?
Garden mixes. The question that I have is he talking about seed mixes? What does he mean by milpa mixes? I'm not clear about that.
Okay.
Can't
Well,
I don't want to try to
yeah, he hasn't
answer
answered
something
it.
I don't understand.
Sure. Green cover seeds providing for 40 species.
Yeah. This is from another
No,
attendee.
this is Paul clarifying what Milpa garden mixes are.
Green cover seeds of multi-species. Oh, that sounds great. Sounds like a good cover crop mix. Very good. Absolutely. Use it in any way you can. Use it as a solo crop, or use it between rows or between plant spaces. Absolutely use it.
Marilee asks, or she explains that they rent a small pea patch, which makes it difficult to rotate crops. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, for starters, you should plant something between your rows, and it doesn't have to be something that's sacred. I mean, it's something you can step on if you have to get between the rows or whatever. But that starts you in the right direction. Now, it suggests to me that you're not ever rotating those peas, which may not be the best thing to do. You ought to consider having an alternative plot so you can rest your pea plot. And by resting, I mean planting a cover crop or planting something else in an alternative season, just to give those peas a break.
Okay. That was it for the questions today. Let me switch my screen. Let me get out of, oh, nope, went too far. There we go. All right. Thank you all for joining us today and being a part of Green America's Climate Victory Gardens community. Together, we can make a real difference in creating positive change for our planet and its people. You can keep the momentum going and stay connected by subscribing to our newsletter to remain informed about our latest campaigns, events, and sustainability tips. Brooke is going to put a link in the chat for where you can stay connected. Your support fuels our work toward a greener, fairer future. Consider donating today to help us continue our vital programs and initiatives, including these free gardening webinars. Every contribution counts. Remember, your actions matter, and together we can build a more sustainable and just world. Thank you for your commitment to creating positive change. We look forward to seeing you at our future events. And you'll see here on the slide I have up that there's a QR code for our next webinar in a few weeks here. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Much gratitude for you showing up today. Take care.
Thanks a lot.